Tim, sometimes in our journey through the happenings and the to-dos of the gun world, our stories stack on each other. And it turns out in this second segment, this one stacks too. I want to just bring you into something that happened in the NYC in the subway, since we're talking about gun rights. So this one I find so intriguing because there was a shooting on the subway after, Hochul deployed the National Guard, and there was a police precinct actually in the station where this occurred.
And they're supposed to be searching bags and all that other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's so fascinating because this story caught my attention. There were no charges filed for one of the guys who defended himself in the subway against an aggressor. Now, let me walk you through some high-level stuff here because this is where it gets really interesting. You know that the subway is a sensitive place, right? So Hochul's law says, no, subway not cool. You can't have a gun on subway because it's a sensitive place, blah, 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 XYZ. So a criminal who is known to sling drugs, was the exact words from the article, was on the subway, gets in an altercation with another guy, okay?
Yeah.
Guy who is being assaulted verbally by the criminal. They start scuffling and kind of verbally fighting. Everyone gets to the other side of the train car. The guy who is the criminal, the drug dealer, goes into his pocket and grabs a gun. This is all on camera. Grabs a gun and starts threatening the guy that he was in a verbal altercation with. Scuffle ensues. The guy who did not have the gun, the one who was defensive, got the gun away from the bad guy and shot him. He's now hospitalized. Okay? So understand what we're talking about here.
Right.
This is really important to the story. The guy who did not have the gun got the gun away from the guy who brought the gun. Okay? So the criminal who brought the gun into the sensitive place, past the police precinct, past the National Guard, threatened the other guy with a gun. Guy being threatened, wrestles the gun away, shoots the bad guy with his own gun. Land that plane fully with me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is epic.
Which is absolutely epic.
Yeah.
Okay, so put a pin in that for 1 second. Do you remember the story last year with the Marine who choked out the guy who was assaulting and threatening people on the NYC and who was charged and then convicted of manslaughter? Remember that?
Yep.
Okay. Now we go back to this story in, I think it was this weekend or it was right before the weekend. There are no charges filed for the guy who defended himself. Okay, so there's a very interesting flex of not working, right? In fact, if I go to number 9 here, while the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office spokesperson, Oren Yaniv, on Friday said the shooting was shocking and deeply upsetting, he added that at this stage, evidence of self-defense precludes us from filing any criminal charges against the shooter, which is good.
Yep.
But what's so fascinating to me about this is if this exact same guy who wrestled the gun away from the bad guy had brought his own gun, he'd be in jail.
Right.
So effectively, what they just said is if you go into an environment and you don't have a gun and you somehow wrestle away a gun from someone who does have a gun and defend yourself with his gun, that's self-defense.
Okay. Yeah.
If you bring your own gun after you've been trained, licensed, and you're concealed carrying and you defeat a threat, you're going to jail.
Right, because you took it into a sensitive place.
Correct.
But if you mug the mugger and take theirs, well, you're okay.
You're perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we landed that plane because now we can actually break it down. Is that not is that insane?
This is nuts. And every time we talk about New York City subways and stuff like this, back in 1984, you probably remember the name Bernard Goetz, right? He was
vaguely.
So Bernard Goetz was at the time there was no such thing as concealed carry in New York, legal concealed carry. And he was riding the train, was accosted. He was beat up and stuff. And so he decided, I've had enough. He went and bought, I think it was a .38 special revolver and decided to carry a gun, wound up being accosted by 4 different, criminals, if you will. And he wound up being charged with, because he shot his firearm on the subway, he was charged with 4 counts of attempted murder, 1st-degree assault on 4 counts, reckless endangerment, 3rd-degree criminal possession of a weapon, 4th-degree criminal possession of a weapon, 3 counts. And this is a statement to how people within these cities who may be left-leaning get so fed up with the crime that there's a thing called jury nullification. You know what he wound up doing?
Yes, there is.
1 year in jail, released after 8.5 months.
Which still is too much, by the way.
Which is too much. But in 1984, that was huge. The reports just said they let him walk with nothing. That he should be in prison for the rest of his life for defending himself. But this is so basically what I'm getting at here is eventually the people of New York City are going to get sick of this, and they're not going to take it anymore. And if they were to bring somebody up like this person on charges, the jury is going to say, no, you know what? I'm sick of it. No, it was self-defense. I don't care what you say, Mr. Prosecutor. I don't care what your instructions are to the jury, Mr. Judge. No, we're not doing it.
Eventually.
Yes. It does happen. It's called jury nullification. You'll have various legal minds talk about whether or not it's a valid thing or not, but I personally believe in it. But I just think that's where this is going with places like New York, because they're so sick of it. I mean, for goodness sakes, they had to call out the National Guard just to try to get things under control, and this is still going on.
Right. And the irony of that, they called out the National Guard to defend a sensitive place, which they said would prevent gun usage because there's gun usage, and then they're employing stop and frisk by the National Guard in the subway systems.
Right.
I thought stop and frisk was like the most egregious thing that you've ever seen. I thought it was like the most horrible thing that's ever existed in the entire planet, and now they're doing it again under a Democratic governor?
Yeah. She caught some flack for it. But she's going full steam ahead with it. But I mean, look, she's between a rock and a hard spot here, because really these major cities are doing nothing to curtail crime. They're doing nothing to enforce law. As a matter of fact, they're rolling it back, and they're losing police officers at a dizzying pace because they're hog tying them and tying their hands so that they can't even do anything. If the police are getting so frustrated, they arrest somebody for attempted murder, and before they even finish their paperwork, some judges put them back out on the street on their own recognizance.
Correct.
And so people are getting fed up with it. And that's why I was talking about jury nullification, all this other stuff. Eventually the citizens are just going to say, I've had enough. And we've seen this before. It happened before under Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor.
Exactly.
So
that's exactly what happened.
It's this vicious circle. We don't learn from history, so we just are doomed to repeat it over and over and over again.
In certain areas, yeah. But listen to the statistic as we wrap the story up. I find this super fascinating as 1,000 more National Guardsmen were put in here. So in February, there was a 15.4% drop in crime compared to the same month last year. But wait for it. Robbery dropped 5%. Grand larceny dropped 28.6%, while felony assault stayed the same. Okay, hold on a second. You apply police and National Guard, theft and larceny goes down, but felony assault stays the same. What does that angle towards, Tim?
I think that's what we call gang violence.
I think that sounds like something like that. Yeah, because if you've had no change in one of three categories and you've increased police or National Guard presence, that would mean that violent people committing felonious acts are still doing it. It's almost like it's the people, Tim.
Yeah. No, it's the guns.
That's weird.
Yeah, I know.
But arrests in the transit system are up 45%, though. And they say it right here. I see it. It's weird, Tim. I mean, it's almost like they're only arresting theft, but they're not arresting felony assault.
Yeah, it's almost like they're giving people slaps on the wrist and turning them loose.
That's like, so weird.
Look, this is your first murder. Let's we're just gonna let you go out and here's this ankle monitor. You know what? We're not even gonna do that. Just go home. Do you promise to be a good person? Sign right here. If you're not a good person, then we're gonna take your candy away, and then they send them home. It's like, but this is why our cities are falling into complete disarray, and this is why the governor has Holcomb has gone so far as to call out the National Guard, but still they're not fixing the root problem.
Nope. Well, and they're part of the root problem too.
Well, right. They're going to keep blaming guns, and they're going to continue to tie the hands of law enforcement and roll back crimes or not crimes, but laws that protect the innocent, and they're passing laws that favor the criminals to the point where stores have to lock up everything from Q-tips to body wash that you have to get a key to open it because they are not enforcing any laws. You can go in to steal up to $1,000 of stuff in some cities. Nobody cares.
Right.
Just go on home.
That's weird.
It's because any number of reasons they come up with. It's not their fault. It's society's fault.
Society.
Yeah.
It's society. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the society. So take your buckets of white privilege and go to the mountain.
But it does look like the increased sales of firearms and the increased licensing is bringing down most of the categories except for the felonious assault. And
Exactly. In the place of sensitive places where they aren't allowed to carry them.
right.
It's weird.
And I would imagine a lot of that
Um,
felonious assault's taking place, on the streets somewhere, and it has something to do with drug trade and gang violence. I'm guessing because
mm,
they're not tackling
mm.
that problem whatsoever.